there happened to be a guitar player in New York. The best guitar player in New York happened to be a 4-string player that played tenor guitar. And he played Leonard Ware. He worked down at George's place in the Village, and then he worked up in Harlem a lot. And to me, he was the finest player in New York at that time. He could really make things happen. But at that time, he was playing an Epiphone. And that's what got me to go down to the Epiphone people and introduce myself to them. And they were very happy to see me interested in the Epiphone and to come down there. And so we became very good friends over the period of years.
Okay, well, tell me, had you played any Epiphone guitars up to this point in your career?
Yeah, I had played Epiphone guitars and liked them very much, but I was a Gibson player, and so while I had an Epiphone, I was a Gibson man.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember? What model Epiphone you played?
Yeah, it was a deluxe.
Nice guitars.
Oh boy, still got it.
Really?
Yes, sir. Still have it, and it's an excellent guitar. For rhythm, you can't, well, it just happened to be one of the real fine guitars. And it had a little different, well, not a little different, quite a bit different sound than the Gibson. And when I came to New York, then I got acquainted with the Epiphone people, and that's where the whole thing started.
Okay, tell me, how did you meet the Staffapulo brothers?
I just went down to 14th Street and said, "Hi, I'm Les Paul," and they'd known me from being on the show, you know.
Can you tell me a little bit about the factory on 14th Street, what your recollections are of that?
Yep. Well, it was on the second floor on 14th Street, and I don't know what was under it, but I keep thinking it was a Woolworth store or dime store. But anyway, when I used to go there so much, it was on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And of course, the foreman, the watchman, just showed me where the levers were to throw on the current to run the lathes and to do this and to do that. And the place was mine. Mm-hmm. So Sunday there was no one there but the foreman, and he was there, not the foreman, the night watchman, mm-hmm. you know. And I'd go in the front door and come out the back door to go home. And when I left Fred Waring in 41, I went to Chicago. And in Chicago, a fella called me on the phone and said, I caught my hand in a bread wrapping machine and my right hand was mangled. So I would like you to have my guitar. And I said, well, let me pay you something for it. And he didn't want to take anything, and I gave him $125 for that and the amplifier. And I ended up with an Epiphone guitar and an Epiphone amplifier. And I said, well, I'm not going to use this thing. I want to cut it up. I'm going to experiment with it. I have 3 of them here, and they were to become one of the most predominant guitars that I was to play. I made that guitar, that one that got caught in the bread wrapping machine, and I mounted those pickups, wound them, and did everything, did all my experimenting. And also, before, I must go back a bit, before I left New York, I built the log down at the Epiphone Factory, and they let me use the Epiphone Factory every Sunday. So every Sunday, I put in a lot of hard work down there to make the log, the Epiphone, and put wings on it. So Epiphone, you know, they'd ask me what in the world I was building there, and I told them, and they didn't seem to be very interested. When I went to Chicago and talked to them there, they weren't interested. Gibson wasn't any more interested. In fact, I got the name, the character with the broomstick with the pickups on it. And so I kept going with the log, and from there, with the back to the bread wrapping guitar, I took that guitar and mounted the pickups where I wanted to mount them and do what I wanted to do. And of course, it was to be on so many of the recordings in the box set that you can hear today on Capitol and everybody raves about the sounds and everything. Well, some of those sounds was the log, some of those was the epi. In most cases, for a long period of time, that's all I used. And so I did them with Crosby. That was the Epiphone on there. I used Epiphone 41 to 49 to 51.
When you started endorsing Gibsons, I was going through some very early ads, and there was one in particular that Gibson welcomes Les Paul to the Gibson family or something like that. You're very obviously playing a converted Epiphone in the picture.
That is right.
Yeah,
what they did is they says, what can we do to get you off the Epiphone? And I says, well, the farthest I can go at this point is to just take the name Epiphone, which is on there was a plate on the Epiphone. You could take it off with two brads, pry it off, and put a Gibson decal on there that said Gibson. And that made them happy, Gibson people happy. And I says, when you can make a guitar like that, then I will drop my Epiphone. And which was said Gibson, but it was an Epi. And I kept that up until finally we made the solid body guitar. And when after making them and sawing them up and everything else, I finally says, okay, we'll go with it.
Did you know Herb Sunshine at Epiphone?
Very, very well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you ever sort of share secrets with Herb as to what was going on?
Sure did. He was a beautiful guy to be around. And Herb was just very, very nice. And when Epiphone went down, I held their hands. They cried right in the room. They cried to see that thing hit the dust, you know. And they were where Polk City is in down in the village. They were above it.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Pastors at that time.
Yeah, Tony Pastors.
That's right, and they were up above it. And they were sitting there, and they gave me all the parts that they had no use for anymore. This is take them list. And so I have a lot of Epiphone parts laying here. I'm the guy that talked Gibson into buying Epiphone.
Well, that's an interesting story. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure can.
Yeah.
I told Mr. Maurice Berlin, I made the suggestion to him, you know, Epiphone is sitting there and it has one hell of a name, and why don't you just make a deal and get that name, and then make a different line of guitars so they're separate from the Gibson line, and you can go creating other ideas, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Berlin did just that. He purchased the name and everything else. But what they did at Gibson that I didn't like, and I kept telling them up there, and I had a little difficulty with a couple of the foremans, and that is that they were identical guitars except they changed the names on them.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gibson line, they use the same wood, the same guys building them, the same fretboards, the same everything. They made minor changes between an Epiphone and a Gibson. So if you saw a flat top coming off of there and it said Epiphone, it was the same guitar as the Gibson one. I talked the Gibson people into buying the Epiphone name and to continue to carry it on. And of course, now we have a line of Les Paul Epiphones, and I keep hammering at Gibson because I want them to be absolutely top quality. And I don't care where they're made. They just got to meet the standards, and as long as we keep the quality control on it, and that name is on there, Les Paul, I want to make sure that underneath that name is a good guitar.